All right, welcome back to Business Today. We are doing Biz Chat, and the focus is budget 2023-2024. Now, we've seen some interesting presentations right here. Gentlemen in suits, they dressed up for it to make sure that Kenyans are getting those hits and misses, and those points actually hit the right spots. But during the break, one of the gentlemen was not very pleased with me because I didn't allow him to, do a presentation and do that walk down. Mr. Ramogi, you wanted an opportunity to just highlight some of your hits and misses, albeit brief. The floor is yours briefly.
Yes, I was wondering why I'm being treated as a bastard. And I think, first of all, I was very pleased that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance well recognized and identified the issues that Kenyans submitted to him that needed addressing in this budget. Among them being the issue of unemployment, the issue of high tax burden or the heavy tax burden, and the high levels of debt. As to whether he addressed those issues or not, the mere fact that at least he had identified what the issues were that Kenyans want addressed was very pleasant, to say the least. But now, moving from that, the other thing that I'm pleased with in this first budget of the Kenya Kwanza administration is the fact that we are now seeing more towards agriculture and agribusiness in general. That has not been the case in the past. We've seen agriculture getting less than 1% of the budget. Now that has gone up a little. I expect that as of next year, there will be more increment in that area. There's also some resources going into the micro and small enterprises. I still think it's very marginal and paltry, but just that the fact there's a focus going in that direction is pleasant. In terms of manifesto, in terms of pursuing what the country needs at the moment, I think he's on the right track. In terms of misses, for me, the financing bit is still, we are still not getting it right. For some reason, the Cabinet Secretary and his colleagues believe that increasing the taxes will give us more money or will make us collect more resources for running the government. I don't think that's accurate. I think there is a miss, and the fact that you are increasing the tax burdens of Kenyans simply means there are businesses that will close, there are people that will suffer, and there's tax that they will not collect anymore.
Now we've cleared, and just to put things clearly, Mr. Ramogi, you are not bastard in this show in any manner. Yeah, no, Ken was seated here and he started to feel sorry for you, but he's happy now we are on the same level. And
Thank
Ken, talking about some of these situations, bottom line is that what impacts mwananchi, is this a budget? How far has it veered from expectation, using the promises and also the better framework as sort of the measuring length to this particular budget? Has it met expectations?
Oh, absolutely not. No, it's actually veered quite far. Almost every interview that you perform here on an ordinary Mwananchi only confirms that. And Ramogi has raised an interesting point about higher taxation does not necessarily lead to increased revenue collection. Sometimes that's the laugher curve. You can actually end up with shorter. But I think what the Treasury Ministry has tried to achieve is to look for items that have what is called a high inelasticity, precisely things like fuel, things like sugar, where you don't have almost direct substitutes. So I think they've tried to target things that Kenyans have almost an inelastic demand for. And from their perspective, if you raise taxes on those particular items, then you can hit those revenue targets. But it does lower the standards of living, and the foundation of economic policy has to be able to raise the standards of living. I think the professor's focus has been on debt sustainability, which is a key interest area for creditors who lend to the country. But I think the priority for the country has to be Kenyans, the Kenyans who voted and the Kenyans who didn't vote, who want healthcare, who want education, and who want jobs.
Definitely. Philip, one of the things that are moving forward, especially in the next financial year, is that Philip, you'll be a very, very healthy human being. Why do I say so? The issue of you taking a lot of sugar has been an issue, and the government is trying to tell you you have to be healthier. So we make it, actually we've introduced sugar into the category of sin tax. But from where you sit, I
join my colleague Ken once again in asserting that this budget has fundamentally departed from the pro-poor budget we expected it to be, to a more, fiscal strategy and a monetary policy oriented budget. I say so that most of our responses within the budget are geared towards satisfying the levels, the bare minimums for our threshold in terms of projections on tax collections, on the GDP projection, and on the actual budget deficit that we talk about on a daily basis. In my expectation, and also borrowing from what Ramogi has said, I looked at some of what we call SME financing funds that are available within our reach. The Wezo Fund, the Women Enterprise Fund, the Youth Fund, the SME Manufacturing Fund. It's only the Manufacturing Fund that is 300 million. The rest are below the threshold of 200 million. And these are constituency-based funds, which means that they're devolved to the constituency level. If we have 290 constituencies as a basic, then you have funds that are less than 200 million in each allocation. It means that you can't meet the threshold of dividing this among the constituencies. You'll end up with less than $1 million per constituency. So in that aspect alone, then you realize that not so much has been pushed to Mwananchi and the people at the bottom of the pyramid.
All right.
The other thing is there is what the president calls a flagship project in agro-industrial parks that are going to be built in counties. But out of an entire close to 60 billion in allocation for industrial parks, it's only 4.7 billion, 100 million per county that goes to the grassroots. The rest is still cash starved and kept at the treasury or within the national government. So the more we see distribution towards the grassroots, towards where the bottoms are, where the people within the poverty line are, then the better that we'll see in the budget. So we need to see more decentralization of funds, for example, so that we realize that this works for people at the bottom of the pyramid.
Definitely. Ramogi, I was listening to the cabinet secretary, especially leading into the budget reading, and also, one of the key people in treasury. And one word kept reiterating. They kept reiterating this one word. It is, we have to sort of persevere. We'll feel a little bit of a pinch. That's why part of the reactions from Mwananchi, they even brought in the issue of, shakaholas, and people saying, is it suffering now, enjoying later? Is that the kind of situation? But we understand where we are fiscally as a country. So in that regard, was this a necessary move, however much it might not resonate with majority of the people who are feeling the pinch of some of these changes?
That's a very good question, Noah. In all honesty, I think we have grown our budget so much and we've not grown our revenue. Because if you take the totality of the budget, including the consolidated fund and the expenditures within the consolidated fund, then you find that this budget goes all the way to 4.4 trillion. But if you look at the revenues that we are going to collect as a country, you find that our revenues would go up to 2.9 trillion. So you find then our deficit is not just 712 billion, the one that we are going to borrow for development expenditure. Our deficit goes all the way to 1.5 trillion, the real or the actual deficit. And that's too big. And that is what has pushed the country into a borrowing spree in the last few years. Now, to correct that, then, you need to ask yourself, how do we spruce up the collections, the revenue collections, so that they can be at par with what we need as a country? And to do that, you need to increase the taxes, or at least you need to increase the tax rather poorly, because we are overburdening those who are already within the tax bracket. And that is where now you find that the government is struggling to increase VAT on fuel, to increase taxes on sugar, to increase taxes, collections on NHIF, because we are collecting lower than we need. Is it necessary then to bite the bullet and take the sacrifice and ensure that you correct that as early as now? Yes, it is necessary. But the bigger problem we have is not just that. The bigger problem that Kenyans have with this administration is the whole question of trust. Because as Ken had pointed out, on one hand, you're saying we are taking sugar for your health, or we are taxing sugar for your health. On the other hand, they have increasingly refused to devolve health funds, because they are still being withheld at the national government, and now they have reduced. They have increased more spending at the national government and refused to devolve this fund. And we have experienced that health funds at the national government get stolen. And so it's a question of trust. Yes, we need to bite the bullet, perhaps tighten our belts, and have a good revenue strategy, but these are not the people we want to trust with that assignment, because they are talking about spending less on one hand. On the other hand, the State House has more allocation, the Office of the Deputy President has more allocation, and they are not tightening their own belts. So it's more of an issue of trust.
And talking about trust, gentlemen, we have less than 5 minutes to complete this program. I wanted to pick your mind, because I was looking at the deficit and the financing of the deficit of course borrowing, and they say actually they will focus more on borrowing locally than internationally. Now, looking at, if we go by anything recently, the result of 7-year Treasury bond that was issued, an infrastructure bond, dated 19th, this month, 2023. The amount on offer was 60B, and the total bids received was at 220B, from 60 to 220B, and the amount accepted was 213B. So initially I needed 60 billion. I got bids worth 220, and now since I've got 220, I might as well take 212. What does this reflect on? Because you've been told if you're going to borrow locally, majority.
Because it shows you are saying, yes, it's for infrastructure. You assume the infrastructure projects have already been mapped and have been costed, but you ended up taking up almost 3 times than what is hit. So it's lack of prudence. We talked about prudence last week being as a virtue that should drive public finance. But I think there's a more fundamental point that needs to be made around how we are doing our fiscal policy and our budgeting, and it's tied to the budget that was presented yesterday, that assumes that we're going to borrow 700 billion shillings, but we only have about 400 billion to hit our debt ceiling. So you're being given a budget that assumes that you will increase that debt ceiling automatically, and that's highly lack of prudence, because what if Parliament decides they will not increase that debt ceiling, it means the whole budget, 2023-2024, completely collapses. And that's lack of prudence. So I think they should have raised the issue of the debt ceiling first, give it to Parliament, let them raise it. Then now you can give up. We should always give a budget to the existing circumstances, not to future expectations. Because as we've seen in the United States, when they had the debt ceiling debate, they actually refused to lift the debt ceiling. What they did is they suspended the debt ceiling. So if that happens and you've had a budget that assumes you'll get that leave to do so, you put the country in tremendous jeopardy, because you have to come up now with an entirely new budget, and you create all sorts of confusion.
Philip, if at all the president said with this finance bill is to go by, it seems Parliament and the way executive has planned itself, it seems almost reassurance that some of these changes will go through, like the amendment to the PFM Act to remove the 10 trillion ceiling and peg a percentage of the GDP when it comes to our debt. But on that issue of receiving bids that are almost thrice what the government was expecting from the local market, does that not boost the confidence of the government, saying, you see, we have money is within the country, we can borrow and fill our deficit?
Indeed, there could be money to borrow to fill deficits, but unlike the fiscal prudence that we expect, an infrastructure bond target cannot be a moving target. It cannot shift. If we have pegged a target at 60 billion, then prudence requires that you can only uptake what you've planned to repay within a particular fiscal period, which means that when we go into the 220, 212, then we are overshooting our target. Okay. The other thing is, yes, we expect that those numbers would do us some evil in terms of our fiscal strategies, our monetary policies. And so the citizens have to expect to, be punched and be boxed more to the corner, at least as we stabilize the nation.
Okay.
But I don't expect that Parliament is going to endorse every other strategy will fly off our economy to the roof.
Definitely. Ramogi, you have the last word in less than 30 seconds. What does this tell? If the long-term papers, the bonds are to go by, don't you have money in the local market?
Government is money hungry and cash strapped. You give them money, they take. And that's the reality of it. But I wanted to comment on the issue of debt ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Debt ceilings don't work. And the reason they don't work is not necessarily because Parliament will not approve.
Okay.
It's because Parliament is political and Treasury has a way of just manipulating them into accepting what they have asked for.
All right.
So they will still oblige to a professor's request and actually extend the debt ceiling.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, what a week we've had. Thank you very much. Diambura Mogi, Philip Pande, and